Streaming. Get that to go live. Okay. We should be live now. Okay. Let's double check the live videos dashboard. Okay, good. We should be live. Let me get the social going. Click.
You guys will have to tell me how I figure out if I'm supposed to follow the chat, like on the YouTube thing. Is that like, should I try and open that up?
Yeah, you can. Yeah. I have like a side. I have my iPad set up over here so I can plug it with the chat.
Okay, there is that. Get a over here. Sorry, I'm getting it all taken care of. I was telling Jason and Blaine earlier, Mike, that I know there's a few people who we're going to try to join a little bit later. I think Sherry's going to try to join us. Patrick is sick, so he might be in chat, but he might not join us. We'll see. Maybe we can, if he's in chat, maybe we can convince him to join us. But a few people had some conflicts, so we may have a small round table, but I think we'll have a quality round table, and we will
Very good.
Get the chat going too with hosts. So let me get this Reddit social going. Got the Twitter social. So if anybody is listening to us right now, feel free to go in there and share that link, retweet it, help with some of the visibility. Probably won't have a lot of people since we don't have an upcoming round, but this is...
People use us for our picks and then you leave us.
That's right. That's right. But this is tradition. This is our tradition right here. So, okay, got that. And then I always load up chat on my laptop here so that I can try to minimize the clickety clicks if I can. Hey Ari, hey Kendrick, hey Shannon. Let's see here. Let me change this to live chat. And all right. Got that. Make sure I get into my Twitter account so I can go over some stuff. All right. Well, if everybody is ready, then I think we shall get started. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Let's do this. Hello, fantasy managers, and welcome to the MLS Fantasy Insider. Tonight, we have our annual round table review of the 2020 fantasy season. It's a tradition. Every year after the game's over, after the final whistle, we take some time to review and cover all of the changes that happened and decide if we liked them, if we didn't like them, if our opinions changed, and give out some awards. This episode is brought to you by Caveats, the official sponsor of the 2020 MLS season. Brought to you by MLSFantasyBoss.com and the amazing Patreon supporters of the MLS Fantasy Insider. You guys are awesome. We got Jason with us tonight, Spoiler, who is one of our top patrons. So you guys are so awesome, and thank you again for another year of support. Look forward to going forward with you. This is all for you, so I hope we got people in chat, and let's just do this. Let's jump right into it. As they say in the YouTube world, I'm your host, Reed Connolly from MLSFantasyBoss.com, and tonight I'm joined by my partners in fantasy, Blaine Riffle and Mr. Michael Denton. Hello, fellas.
Hello.
Hey.
And like I said before, we'd also like to welcome tonight's round table. It was everyone from our top tier Patreon supporter group was invited. Some people were sick. Patrick, get better soon, buddy. And some people had some conflicts, maybe joining us later, so you may see a little bit of the sidebar and if you're watching on YouTube right now as I'm monitoring that. But we have Jason Morris with us tonight from Patreon. How are you doing, Jason?
I'm doing good, thank you. I'm doing about as well as I could be expecting at the moment. So happy to be here.
That's true. And we're very excited. I know Jason's tried to join. He's been a Patreon supporter for the whole time, Jason, is that right? 3 years?
No, I think I started, 2017 maybe? I was living in Korea at the time. So
that's right.
I think it was like 2017.
It's been a while.
Yeah, this program, when I was living there, I couldn't watch any games. So basically all I did was play fantasy. So listening to you guys, that was like the between that and extra time, that was how I followed the league for like 2 years.
Yeah, and I'm super excited because we've tried to have Jason on the show for the last couple of years, and there's always seemed to be like either Korea with time shifting or internet connections when he's moving, but it looks like we have a great connection right now and great audio quality, so we are excited to have Jason with us. We're excited for everyone who has joined us in chat. Not as many as we usually have during the game previews, which I expected, but this is just a fun episode where we're going to review everything. So chat, please chime in whenever you like. We would love to hear your feedback as we go over the 2020 season. So let's start with, of course, the rule changes. We all know what they are. We've touched on these topics throughout the short season that we've had, and this is just our final time to take it all into account, and decide what we think. So we're going to be talking about the fixed budgets, the double game week change, the Fantasy Champion League playoff, and the price changing system, and that's the algorithm essentially that I'm talking about right there. So let's start with fixed budgets. Blaine, let's go with you.
I really enjoyed the fixed budget this year. In years past, it's been kind of a money game, and I liked getting away from that. But with as crazy as the year was and kind of the ups and downs, I was out of it a couple of times on the overall, and I know my budget would have tanked had I not had the fixed budget. And it was nice just to feel like I was in it every week. Fair competition. Never had to worry about just losing the game based on a bad week. You are always coming back into it. And I like that. I don't think I would want to go back to the variable budget right away, just because it felt like every week you had something to play for and you had a chance to compete with the best. And I think that was kind of felt around the league. Everybody was making big decisions, and I very rarely heard comments of, well, I'm just priced out of this guy because I don't have the budget. Even at the end, we were still debating Ladero and Pozuelo, who are both hovering 14, 15 million. We could fit both of those in there, and you never once heard somebody say, I can't afford to put both of them in there. I'm choosing not to put both of them in there, but it was never I just can't do it. And that made me feel good, just knowing that everybody had a fair shot to go get those couple of guys that were always up there. And they really did earn those spots on everybody's roster towards the end of the year. And I didn't feel like anybody could game the system early and make sure they had a competitive advantage at the end. And that really made me happy for the year.
Jason, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I pretty much second what Blaine said. I like the fixed budget. I mean, I wasn't, I think the previous years were fine too, but I do kind of like the fixed budget. I mean, I think the one thing I'd probably say about it, maybe people wouldn't think this, but for me, I think it'd be kind of interesting to even tighten it a little bit. Like, I felt like it would just make the game a little bit more interesting, especially towards the end of the season, if there was a little bit less money sloshing around and you were kind of almost forced to dig a little bit deeper to find some more interesting players. But I think as a compromise between, what it had been like for the last few years and then going with this one, I think it's probably great. I mean, this is my like social scientist brain thinking about this. Like, if you could figure out how many more casuals you attracted to the game because of this change and other changes, that would be a really interesting way to think about it. Are there people who stuck with the game a lot more than they would have maybe in past years, because they knew that their budget they weren't going to get, totally behind on the budget and that kind of thing. But I was happy with the change overall.
Yeah, I hear what you say, and that makes me think immediately, like putting two of these together, like the Champions League, the best of the best, the top 400 people, whatever we had, they would get 100 million, and that would be their budget for the Champions League. Like, then it's like, all right, let's see how good you are. That would be kind of interesting. But no, I like that, and I really feel like this is sort of a rough year for a lot of these changes that come out with COVID and the impacts that had too. Mike, your thoughts on the fixed budgets?
I pretty much agree with Jason and Blaine. The only thing I'll add is I'm glad that with all the other stuff that we had to sort through with this year and double game weeks and COVID and injuries and all of this stuff, I was glad we didn't have to focus on the budget. I did think that it really kind of forced you to kind of go into the weeds in something. I think the only issues I kind of had with the budget system was really more of pricing issues, which we'll get to in a little bit. But I thought the fixed budget was fine. I thought it kept it fair. So I wouldn't make any changes other than, maybe if you wanted to tweak it, depending on what you do with the price change system.
Yeah, we have Shannon in chat who says that she was nervous at first, but really liked the change. I feel like it added more thought and skill. I agree. I think it did make you really have to decide, am I going to spend the money on Paz? Am I going to spend the money on Ladero? Or if I'm going to get both of those guys, where am I going to go budget? And I know a big worry a lot of people had was having budget players that could fill those spots. And I think at least on defense, we had a lot of success at finding players who were sub 7 million at times, sub 6, sub 7 million, who were starters who could go in there and help you save some money. And even we had several budget forwards this year as well. I will say, here's the question that comes out to everyone. Having the fixed budget is definitely different from the other fantasy games. I mean, especially if you're coming from FPL over to fantasy MLS, you're used to this market. The market system is more of the value changes, but you're used to this sell-on fee and getting more money if you're doing better, that kind of thing. Do you think that it is a barrier to some people who are trying MLS for the first time or coming over? Is it a fun thing for us who have been in the trenches for a while, but someone who's just coming over to try it, is it too different? Anybody?
I would say, I'm sure it is slightly a barrier, but I think the bigger barrier to FPL participation, assuming they're Americans, first of all, otherwise you have the time change system. Mm-hmm. I think the other quirks of MLS are bigger issues for FPL players than this. I think unlimited transfers, unrolling transfers are bigger issues to try to adjust than the fixed budget. Because, we haven't had a system that matches FPL's market system for 4 years now? And when we first kind of shifted from that, we didn't lose a lot of FPL. It was when the other changes came in that we really started losing the FPL crowd. So I don't think this is as much of a barrier. I think probably a bunch of FPL players, if everything else was the same, wouldn't be like, okay, sure, we'll try that and see how that goes. But I think it's everything else combined with it that makes it more difficult for them to adjust.
And see, I go the other way. I actually think this is probably a help for FPL players. It's everything else that ran them off. As a player that's tried to jump into FPL or the Fantasy Bundesliga and stuff like that, like not having familiarity with all the players in those other leagues and not knowing where to go to find value, if you start losing the money game early on that because you don't really know the league, it's a big turnoff. That's why I've never stuck with any of the other ones long enough for it to matter, because I get behind in the game and I don't know the players well enough, and I can't course correct really quick and say, oh, these players are hot right now, so I'm just going to gamble with the guys that are hot right now. I kind of get stuck with, well, I can't afford the guys that are hot right now because their value keeps going up, and you get screwed all over the place. I think for me, fixed budget it eliminates one of those barriers for entry when you are a little more ignorant of the league and trying to learn it. And I would probably stick with some of the other games if they had something like this, because I wasn't losing a competitive advantage every week that I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, Derek in chat says that he enjoys the uniqueness. We don't have to be like FPL. Definitely not. And I will say one thing that has been consistent with MLS is our point generating system of how players earn points and how bonus points are calculated is far and away different from FPL, and in my opinion, superior to FPL in every way, where players get rewarded or penalized for their job and doing their job well or doing poorly at their job. So definitely don't have to be like FPL. Not what I'm saying. I wanted to try to throw out some of the common criticisms as well. The last one being that getting more budget is in itself like a reward for doing well. And so some people feel like they're not being rewarded for doing well. My take on that is, well, you should be getting points if you're picking good players who are scoring big points and you're getting a great score. you're going to be rising into overall ranks. You're going to be winning your head-to-heads. You're going to be qualifying for some of those league prizes. That's your reward. You don't necessarily have to have the biggest budget, because then it just turns into, well, let me get the top players every week, which we know, though, aren't always the best scoring players every week. But do you all think that that is also a barrier for some people, that they want to see that price because that validates their success? Maybe that's the wrong word.
I mean, I can understand that perspective. I think the issue that we had in MLS was that it was really mostly a reward for being successful in the first few weeks, because that was where you had the most dramatic price rise. You could really game the system, because it was basically figure out what Ben Bear got wrong whenever he set the pricing system and kind of plug into those players for a few weeks. And because I remember we made picks on this podcast, like, I have this person on my team. They probably won't do well, but they're getting a 0.5 price rise regardless. So I'm taking it to the bank. And I don't know if that's something that we want in the game. I don't know that that's really fun for players. It is a reward, but I mean, then you just end up kind of getting a snowball effect of, well, I have the biggest budget, so now I can buy all the best players who are going to get me more budget, and just kind of keep on going down the road. So I think if maybe the price system were adjusted so that it wasn't as much of a shock, which I know we had a little bit of a change this year, but really no opportunity to see it function the way that we would have wanted to see it because of COVID. Maybe you could do something like that and kind of bring it back, but it's in the past, it's basically been a separate game of its own for the first few weeks, and that's been the problem in MLS.
Yeah, a little mini game. Pause for a second as we welcome Ari Hillman to our roundtable. Ari, how are you doing?
I am doing well. How are you?
We're doing well. Thank you so much for joining us. I mentioned that some of the people may be coming in a little bit after the show started, and glad you were able to make it. I think you're in here twice, so I don't know if that's phone and laptop.
No, I think I'm just not smart sometimes, but I will figure out why.
So we're seeing double.
Is Ari double sleeved? I've been reading those Altered Carbon books. I don't know if he's.
It's my alter ego.
Well, Ari, we were just talking about our first topic for our 2020 review, and that is the fixed budget system. Most of us enjoyed the change, thought it added a nice strategic level to it, but we were acknowledging some of the common criticisms about being rewarded for doing well and how there's some similarities with other systems. Before we move on to our next topic, our next change, which was double game week scoring system, what were your thoughts on the fixed budgets this year?
Give me 1 sec.
Uh-oh. There we go. We had some feedback, but I think with one instance of you now, we should be good. So let's try that again.
There we are.
There it is.
Okay.
There it is.
I think I fixed it. Woo. Sorry, long day. Can you repeat the question? I was busy trying to figure out why there were two of me.
No problem. So we're going over the changes and how we thought about them. We were just finishing up our conversation about fixed budgets. We liked it. We all thought it added a nice level of strategy, but we're acknowledging some of the common criticisms of not being rewarded for doing well, and also some of the ease of familiarity of moving from other games. What was your thought on the fixed budget system, the fixed $125 million?
I kind of liked it. Obviously, I'm a rookie, so this is my first year, so this was whatever. I would say it was pretty cool to start because, what'd be the fun if you had unlimited budget? We'd all have the same team pretty much every week. But I would say I liked it because it was stressful.
Oh.
Like, as weird as that sounds, at the beginning I was picking players, you'd get your Pozuelos or your Laderos and everything would be great. But towards the middle and end of the season, you kind of had to think, I can't just take whoever I want because now they're all, Ladero's a good chunk of cash. You can't just put them on your team and assume you can get a bunch of Laderos and Pozuelos without having some scrubs here and there. So I actually kind of like that because it made you think about, who is that middle of the tier or lower tier player that you can take that could be a boom. Your Castellanos is, etc. Like those guys. It was cool when you'd get, DK or Castellanos and, they get a goal, and that's huge. That's what you want out of a guy like that. somebody that cheap that can still get you 5-6 points. So I thought it was pretty good. I liked it a lot.
Awesome. Glad to hear that from a first-time player, and happy to have a first-time player with us as well.
Yeah.
Shannon made a comment in chat about wonder how the surveys came out. The only thing I know about surveys, if you are listening to the show on YouTube or later on SoundCloud or whatever podcasting service you subscribe to, if you have not already seen the fantasy survey come through your email account for your fantasy account, please look for it. James Ballow put together just a feedback survey from players. Go ahead and take that. I know when I talked to him 2 weeks ago that he had gotten close to 800 responses to that survey, and he was very happy with that. So, Shannon, I don't know what the surveys said, but I know that James has gotten a lot of responses back, so awesome community for doing that. If you've done that already, thank you so much. If you haven't, check it out. I know the more that we get, the better we can try to make the game next year. So, interested in seeing what happens. You forgot to do it, JoJo? Shame.
I forgot to do it too. I gotta jump on it. I know. I saw the email and then it just.
I don't know if it locks. JoJo asked if they still can. I don't know. I didn't ask James about that if there was any kind of lockout. But go ahead and give it a shot. If not, just hit up James Ballow on Twitter and just tell him what you think. Let's move on to the double game week change. And I know that there are some people on Twitter who did not like this. I know our friend Derek did not like this at all. From Orlando, his comments was all points should count. I'm interested in seeing what you guys think. Ari, if you didn't pick up on some conversations this year, in the past with the double game week, you would get the double score for both games. So if, like Ladero, I think he got 13 points in each game, you would have gotten 26 points, and if you captained him, you would have gotten the double of 26 instead of the double of the 13. So that's what we're talking about here. Jason, let's start with you. What'd you think of the DGW change?
I was skeptical, at the beginning, but once we went through the process a couple of times, I liked it. Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna die on the hill of we must hold on to this. If we went back to something else, that'd be fine too.
Sure.
But I did like it. I mean, I think it's, yeah. I mean, I guess there's some element of the way that it had been done before. There was some strategic element to who you chose, right? You were making some guesses about, do I really think this center back is going to get 120 or 180 minutes, right, or whatever? Am I willing to pay up for Diego Valeri, even though he might only get 30 minutes in one game, and he's going to play a full 90 in the other game? And do I know which one that is, right? I like the first game that he's in, but I don't like the second game or whatever. But I wound up liking it, yeah, and tried to kind of figure out a way to kind of take advantage of it, I guess you could say, And I mean, one of the things I liked about it would be, just as an example, I didn't want to be using him, but just this past weekend, right, the Bass double game week, I think, or a couple weeks ago, Valeri was, I mean, I had him on my team up until the moment that lineups came out. I think, was it midweek last week? He didn't start.
Yeah, we had a Wednesday game. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I went ahead and just decided to pull him. But in theory, you could have said, hey, I know that he's going to come in as a sub for part of this game. I still like that. Plus, I'm sure he's probably going to get 90 minutes in this other game. And you could still get away with using him in a way that maybe you wouldn't necessarily do that if it was, a kind of all or bust kind of thing. But it didn't bother me, ultimately.
Mike, what'd you think of this one?
I think I thought it was good considering this year where we had just so many midweek games, trying to predict rotation and is this team going to be canceled for COVID. I thought it was really, really nice to have it for this season. I did think that we saw a lot more variety in picks. I thought everything was pretty much on the table, which is when we talked about proposing this a year ago, was what we were hoping was going to happen, and I think it generally did. I really want to see this happen in a normal scenario where it's just one or two double game week teams most of the time.
Right. Not everybody every week, right?
Not
exactly.
Everyone every week. I think the only thing that's disappointing is that I was hoping that part of the double game week change was to allow more promotion of the fantasy game near the weekend, so you wouldn't have to have everything by Monday. Obviously, most of that went out the window because pretty much every team locked by Wednesday anyway. But that would be something I would hope next year could happen.
Ari, what about you? After hearing some of what we've talked about, would you have preferred to get bigger scores?
No, actually, I've always in any fantasy sport I play, like I used to run fantasy football with a group of guys for about 7 years, and we made it so like when you get to 100 points in a standard league, like you had a solid week. I've never been one to be like, oh, the higher the number, the better. I thought it was pretty, at least just from hearing conversations in the past in the Discord group. I think this way sounds 10 times better. I like going into it knowing like you could get a solid guy in Diego Valeri, but you're taking the risk on him only having one game. Or you may take a guy like, I use him again like DK or Castellanos who have 2 games and they may get that extra 20 minutes. So they may play 110 minutes between the 2 games, etc. And just being able to be like, how much can that factor in? Is that second game huge? Or, are you playing, no offense, Cincinnati, for example, and you're like, and you're like, am I, like, why would I not go a double game against Cincinnati, for example, if you got Cincy and somebody else who's a pretty easy to score on? I don't know. I kind of like living up to that chance. Like, I don't want both points. If they really don't do well in game 1, I kind of like, once again, they're kind of stressful. Like, I need them to perform game 2 or I really made a mistake on this pick.
Yeah.
Seems like it's a little more manageable and less taking the easy way out. So I personally think, at least I hope this way goes on forever. I think it's way more fun.
Blaine, anything to add?
No, this was kind of my rule change that I pushed for hard, and I think it did exactly what I wanted it to do for this game. I would say this was probably the most successful rule change I've ever seen MLS implement as far as desired goal goes, which is to vary the rosters from week to week and break up template teams. It did its job.
Yeah, I think it was a great success at that. We could even see it in round 14, and we had a lot of people who had a lot of double game week players. I mean, we all had a lot of double game week players this week, but people were seeing that Miami versus Cincinnati game and thought, that's a single game week defender probably, or maybe going for Higuain or someone that might have been tempted by that. And I know I had a player this week, so I think it made single game week teams much more viable during a double game week. I know a lot of us still had plenty of double game week players. I think defenders had the biggest benefit from this change. If they were able to get one clean sheet, then they got those bonus points. I mean, they would have gotten all the points before, but you sort of had 2 shots at getting at a clean sheet, so that made it a little bit easier with some of maybe those riskier picks, or if you liked a later game, maybe. So it worked there. Again, with defenders, I think a lot of people were having more arguments for why they liked wingbacks instead of center backs. Just if you had more shots at a goal or more chances at an assist from one of those players with those 2 games like that. So that was a reason to sort of stack on those guys instead of hoping for some big bonus points for defenders. But yeah, you guys covered the rotations that we see sometimes with like Mueller or Valeri or other players right there. Will they be there? Will they not? So I loved this change. It definitely also impacted scores. We did not have as many huge blowout scores as we have seen in the past. I mean, triple digits were the common 140, 150 point games, 160 point games. It did help with score inflation, which was not horrible. I mean, it definitely was a good change in my opinion as well, and I hope they do keep this one regardless of what happens with budgets. I really like the double game week change as well. That tends to be the general thought we have in chat as well. Several people were unsure about it, but ended up liking it as it went on. And I think it did great things this year. All right, let's talk about the Fantasy Champions League playoff system. Mike, what'd you think of this one?
I thought it was trash when it was announced, and had gone through it, it was still trash. And it's a waste of thousands of dollars that I don't know how MLS can justify to itself. I mean, look, it'd be one thing, I think, had we didn't have COVID and it was longer periods instead of just basically like a month sprint. That wasn't really the system was designed to do. So I understand if you put that caveat, but the bottom line is that we putting all these gimmicks as far as schedule breakups in order to allow MLS opportunities to promote the game to new audiences. And we're like 3 years now that they've done these gimmicks, and 3 years going, they have not bothered to promote the game whatsoever past the first week of the season. let's just stop it. Just take that prize money, do something else with it, make it weekly prizes, give it to podcasts to promote it. I don't care what you do with it. Let's just do it the overall system. Or if you're gonna do these gimmicks, like, you have to actually promote it. And if they're not gonna promote it, then it's a waste of time, and I don't want to see it again.
Let me ask this question in a slightly different way then. Because it sounds more like your problem is with the promotion side than necessarily the idea of the Champions League playoff. If a gimmick, like we had the opening weekend challenge in the past, we've had this. Those are pretty much the two that we've had: the opening weekend challenge, or I guess the monthly winners, and the Fantasy Champions League. If a gimmick is going to
we also had a split season the past 2 years.
That's right, we had split season. If a gimmick is going to be advertised, is going to be supported, is this the kind of gimmick you'd like to see, or do you prefer some of those other ones?
I like opening weekend challenge. I think makes sense. I think there are a number of events. We talked in the past about maybe doing a Heineken Rivalry Week challenge. Because that had the opportunity to bring in a sponsor interest. Even if you wanted to do something around the All-Star game, I think you can have gimmick weeks. I think where I have a problem is with season splits, because, I mean, especially I think one of the problems that I had was with this is if you messed up 1 week, you didn't make it into the Champions League, whatever one of the segments it was. I suspect that's probably going to be true regardless of how long it is. Obviously, we'd have to really see it to see how it plays out, to be sure. But I'm fine with doing advertising and having special prizes for weeks. I have a problem with we're going to divide the season and do points resets, or where overall score doesn't matter. That's the kind of stuff that I'm just not interested in. I would rather have an overall. Points matter more. I would rather have, and if we're going to do gimmicks, have it centered on we're going to do a special prize for this week and this week alone, and promote it on all the avenues and media to try to bring in new people. Because that to me is the point of all this stuff. It's really the point of prize money is we want to bring in new people to the game. So, but I think what the problem is, the way they've been doing it has been detracting from the quality of the game that we've played. And we made a sacrifice for casuals, and then we don't attempt to recruit, which is just utterly baffling to me.
Well, let's move over to our new player. Ari, what did you think of this Fantasy Champions League gimmick, or hook, or whatever we want to call it?
A little salty because I didn't make it, obviously, competitive. But, that it's kind of hard to say. It didn't really have the wow factor for me. I was more interested in my overall ranking just in general, and then my Minnesota United official group ranking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Champions League, I get it, and it's an interesting gimmick. I'm not gonna harp on it too much because, like I said, I can't really speak too much of it since I'm not there. But I guess it's a toss-up. I don't mind if it goes on next year. I'll obviously try and make it every year. But at the same time, if they took it away, I wouldn't be mad either. Like I said, this was I just wanted to get I just wanted to get see how high I can go, etc.
Yeah. Blaine, what about you?
It was. I'm going to reserve judgment on this one because we didn't get the full 6-week sprints that we wanted. It does seem very sprint focused, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. In theory, I like the idea. I kind of agree with Mike, though. I think promotion is a big issue on it. And I would rather not see it be Champions League, and I would rather see it just be 6-week blocks, whatever it comes out to be through the season, and you award prizes at that point rather than qualifying for the end game and then trying to earn prizes. I would just rather see prizes paid out then and there for top players and then move on. And if you've qualified for one set of prizes, you don't get to qualify again. But it keeps it kind of open, and maybe the prizes get a little bit smaller as the year goes on. I don't care. The first guys to win it get the big prizes, and then they scale down a little bit as those guys drop out. So they do get some benefit for going first. But yeah, I think in theory it kind of works. I don't mind the idea behind it, but in practice this year with COVID and everything, it didn't work at all for me.
Jason.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of take Blaine's point on, this was a really strange year, right? So introducing something like this, potentially in a year that is hopefully next year, I'm knocking on my table, is less strange, right? Would be interesting. I mean, I like Ari. I missed out a couple of times. I didn't get in. Although I do want to go back and see how well I did, just playing the last few weeks of the season compared to all the people that were in the Fantasy Champions League, just to see how many points I got versus how they did.
Yeah.
And I can still kind of play on my own, I guess, right? So yeah, I'd like to see, how it was different. And I don't know, maybe Blaine, maybe some of you guys who looked at the fantasy, this last round, this Fantasy Champions League in more detail, some of you who were in it. Was there anything different to it other than just, hey, these people have already gotten in and this is just a more select group to play in, like additional rules or something that says like, you guys got in, which means you played pretty well for a period of time, so we're going to make it more difficult? I don't think there was, right? It was just playing a game, yeah?
Yeah, it was like making a special invite-only league is really what it was. Yeah. And so I was in it. I qualified in the first chunk, and everyone got in there. Have to pause right now and give a shout-out to Haitian Zavi, who is a Discord member for MLS Fantasy Boss and won the Champions League. So congrats, man,
Congratulations
on that.
Yeah.
So we had definitely some good representation from Discord. And there, I think Todd Modisette, who's also on the show this year,
he did really well. Todd Modisette,
yeah, he did really well. Good. So a lot of guys from Discord did really well. But congrats to Haitian right there. Did very well. But no, you are right. It was just like another league that had several hundred players, and it was kept your scores from that point on. So you're looking at a few hundred points for the last few weeks to get the winner right there from that smaller point, and you still had the overall.
Yeah. I mean, I think it'd be cool if you did like some kind of, I don't know, this is too complicated, and Ben Bear and those guys would never go for it. But like, if you qualify, why don't you do some kind of knockout thing or something, right? Like have these like 4 weeks and I don't know, put people in a bunch of groups or something. If you've got 400 people or however many people you have to qualify, maybe you break that out, into tiers. You've got 4 weeks of this thing. You've got 400 people that qualified. So it's a groups of 100. Okay, top 50 after week 1. You guys get to go.
Oh yeah, that'd be cool.
And that you get.
We've talked about doing like an open cup. I know FPL does a version of that.
Okay.
Or like doing head to head from the start. I don't know if you would have time to do a qualifier, with the systems. But I mean, I think that would be a great idea to really promote head to head. I know Reed loves head to head, and it's not really recognized in the prize pool, and so I would definitely love to see something like that.
Yeah, it was kind of broken some this year too. There were some quirks with the UI being able to see players that haven't played, and I think that got fixed near the end of the season. But it was kind of fixed. But no, I think this was cool. I think you guys are right. The whole COVID thing really impacted it. I think my preference, I liked the opening weekend challenge. I mean, if you could do more than one, I like having an opening weekend challenge because I feel like that helps with hype. But to Mike's point, there needs to be hype from all levels of MLS to help do that, and I think that's a great opportunity to get people in. I also wish that if we're going at gimmicks, we're talking about new gimmicks, I wish there were sort of featured leagues that people could join. Selfishly, I'm thinking about the MLS Fantasy Boss network of leagues, which we give out prizes. I give out prizes to people in our leagues. But if there were leagues like that, I know there are other leagues like mine that we're giving some prizes. So if there were ways for MLS to identify or partner or do some sort of way to promote certain leagues, like I think Wrong Side of the Pond did some stuff, and I think Michael Parkhurst did something with him. ETR did something, but it's like here are 10 leagues that do their own prize thing. It's not MLS, it's separate. It's like if they could promote that in addition to an opening weekend challenge or a Champions League, that sort of gives you a ongoing, like a middle goal to shoot for, just something else that is not just, oh, I messed up at the first week of the season, well, I'm done with this game, or I didn't make the Champions League, now I'm done with this game. If you had just build that community, and that's what I'm all about, community building. So, but no, it's all right. Okay, hot and cold on the Champions League, no problem. We'll see what kind of gimmick we get in 2021.
Do we think we could, how about, since Continental Tire does monthly sponsorships, could we have like a Continental Tire will buy you 4 new tires for your car if you win a certain week?
I mean, that sounds great to me.
Look, my car got a flat this morning picking up storm debris of some nails, so that is a very timely prize that I could use.
There
I'm
we
just
go.
thinking out loud, man. I don't know. But
That
I just need one Continental. Come on.
I just go for snow tires every year. You need new ones because they just wear out so quick. So I take them.
There we go. No, that's a great idea.
No.
Last, yeah, down there. Last change, unless you guys have one you want to throw out. I'm going to go with you again with this one, Mike, because I know this is something that you have been deep into. But the price change system. We didn't really see a change in how the price change system worked this year, as far as like we still had the 3-week average, we still had the 5-week average with an emphasis more on sort of recent form. But there were definitely tweaks into how severe, maybe that's the right word, or how big of a jump a player might get. So, Mike, based on your experience with the price change algorithm in 2019, from what we saw in 2020, did you think this algorithm was better?
So I thought it worked pretty well up front. I thought the only time where I was like, I don't know if this is working the way they wanted to was in the back. I thought defenders got kind of too expensive. I think goalkeepers probably got too expensive. Whereas and it's just kind of weird because you had the COVID issue, so you're basically, I mean, almost every team is playing 2 games a week, or most. So you're just getting huge chunks of data. So you're just having like really big swings.
Yeah.
And a lot of teams were kind of like the teams that were good because they were playing the same bad offensive teams multiple times. And so they were just like really racking up clean sheets. And so that was my only kind of criticism. And I mean, I haven't like sat down and looked at numbers to kind of figure out if one ended up being better than the other. But that was the kind of only thing that I saw. I think the other thing is that, I mean, we talked about Ladero and Pozuelo. We really didn't have what we usually have, which is like some forwards going crazy off and racking up ridiculous amounts of points to the point where they may get to the higher echelons past like 14. You know, had Carlos Vela played this season, what would have been like? I think that would have been an interesting challenge to the system, but as it stands right now, that was my only question, is I don't know if the defenders really fit what they were looking for. And maybe that is. Maybe they wanted to really throw us a curveball, like, hey, defenders from the good teams, you're not having them unless you pay a premium. So that's kind of the only thing that I know that really have changed from this year to last year. From
Blaine,
last year, excuse me.
Blaine, you had some experience with the formula last year as well.
Yeah, I think this price change system only works in the fixed budget. I think it was a little too wild and would completely destroy a budgeting game with the way it is. That said, I've always described this as a corrective formula. It's designed, if you've got a guy that's 4 million and he is going off scoring double-digit points every game, he is going to price himself up closer to that premium in short order. I think we saw it with a few players that they started off in the 6s, maybe 6, 5, 7, and after a few really good weeks, they were rocking 9, 5, 10. I mean, it corrected really fast. And I always felt like I was paying a pretty fair price for the production I was getting, and for the production I was expecting. And that made me feel good. But I will echo what Mike said. Defenders got crazy fast. I don't know if James or anybody's going to listen to us on this. My suggestion would be to do everything the exact same with defenders next year, but multiply their price point by 0.75. So don't even bother with the 6 million starting point. Give them the 8 million, 10 million starting point like every other position has, and then multiply their price by like 0.75 and just chop off that top end number. and goalkeepers as well. That would help so much just to keep these prices down. I run one of my favorite stats in the game is dollars per fantasy point, and I love seeing who's the best value and who's not. And some of this depends on how well they did, what team they were on, and like their recent run of form. Like Brooks Lennon is at 77,000 per fantasy point. That's not terrible. It's actually really good. But he had that really good run of games there in the middle and scored a ton of points, and then he's tailed off here at the end and dropped a lot of value. I think he priced himself up to almost 10 million, and he's sitting at 7.8 here at the end. But I say that to go like that's what he did at the end. Mark McKenzie has had a pretty good year all year. Mm-hmm. He's at 87,000 per fantasy point. And then you got to scroll a long ways down to find Walker Zimmerman, and he's 104 per fantasy point. And he was one of the top defenders all year, but he priced himself out. That when you look at this, you've got to pay for your top guys, but defenders are so weird that they're their own thing, and you can get a lot better returns for your money if you avoid the top end guys. I know we had the debate in those last weeks. Do you take Zimmerman or do you take Romney when you're looking at Nashville? Do you pay the extra to get the extra production from Zimmerman? Well, the game says no. He's at 104,000 per fantasy point, and Romney's sitting in top 10 at 78,000 per fantasy point. So you're getting a better return on your investment with Romney all the way around, unless you just have budget wasted on your bench, and then you can spend it on Zimmerman to make more. So I don't think the price change system did defenders justice, but everywhere else it seems to have worked. I can think of a few years ago, Orlando had the young striker Kyle Lauren come up, and he was just fantasy gold all season long because his price point stayed really low because of the way that algorithm worked. This year, DK came on so strong, and he priced himself up to about where he should have been.
Yeah.
He wasn't a premium. He wasn't really a second-tier guy. He was kind of that third-tier guy. But when he hit, and you could invest in him, but he corrected to where he should have been. So I really liked it. The wild swings only work in a fixed budget, but defenders need a little bit of tweaking still.
Well, since you mentioned keepers, and since we have Ari on here, we're going to have to mention St. Clair with that 11.1 million goalkeeper. He got 9 points in round 14. But I know, Ari, you don't have any experience with the old system, but what did you think about the price changes for players?
You know, it was very tough because there were guys that I had Dane St. Clair a couple times when I couldn't fully decide who I'm picking each week. And then you're like, you know what, let's just homer it on a couple of Minnesota defenders.
Yeah, not bad.
I took your advice a while back, and I went with the defender goalie combo. And I was like, might as well boom or bust your own team by doing a little double there. And I noticed it was good for a while, but it got scary because when you have a guy like St. Clair, you're excited. You're like, oh, the budget's fine. I'm always within budget. I'm not too worried. But that's when he was priced at 6-7 million, and you're like, okay, it's Minnesota at home. We do very well at home. We have a much better chance at the clean sheets at home. But then you get to your final 3 weeks, and you're like, man, I want him because we're at home against, a Cincinnati, for example. You're like, I can't spend 11 million on a goalie. And
I know.
I picked that up real quick in the Discord chat too, and people are like, no, find whoever the 4 million keeper is going right away. Put him on your bench in the goalie spot. Put a scrub in the goalkeeper spot, and you get the free game for 4 million, whatever keeper that may be. But no, I think just from the defender standpoint also, because I noticed I was kind of looking back at my week ones, week twos, and I was hitting on my defenders because I was taking Mensa and a fool multiple times, and Columbus was just on a tear back then.
Yep.
And so I was kind of riding that throughout the season on like defenders. But yeah, it got very tricky when all of a sudden, you could have your Pozuelos at the beginning of the year and still have a Tenor Holm, a Mensa right away. But near the end of the season, you couldn't do that. Now you have to find that middle tier defender, keeper, and hope a guy like Robles would hit when he was playing for only 6 million instead of 10. So it was interesting, but definitely got stressful near the end when you realize like 11 million for a keeper. That can't be normal. Like,
Yeah,
That's way too high. Granted, I got to give him credit for being 23 years old. I was very pleased with that Dan St. Clair did play. And I did look up that stat today on my lunch break, the 6 for 13. So I was pretty proud to see that one.
Jason, what about you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have too much to add, although I would just say I think Mike's point about not you don't have like a Joseph Martinez this year, right? Somebody who's just out killing it at the striker position. And it would have been interesting to see what those algorithms start to look like and how it affects your budget. If, like Ari said, hey man, I never had a problem with, if I wanted to have Ladero and Pozuelo on my team, I could always afford both of them. So what happens, next year when you've got like a couple of really premium midfielders that are priced pretty high, and maybe you have this striker that you want to try and pick up too, I don't know. I mean, that's more about the strategy. And the defender thing is, I'd be interested to have somebody tell me. So first, Blaine pointing out, like, I got to start paying much more attention to like dollars per fantasy point. Like, I hadn't even thought about looking at that stat, but it's a good stat to look at. But the other thing, I'd be interested to have somebody tell me, like, what was Tenor Holm's value at the end of last season, for example, right? Or somebody like that. Was it that high? And I went back and forth on being able to stomach spending that much money. I mean, I definitely carried Walker Zimmerman a bunch of weeks for the end of the season, or maybe Reto Ziegler or somebody in that level, and then I would just try and find some other defenders to put in there. But I don't know. That's more strategy to me than anything else, I think, as far as how you.
I think you guys nailed a lot of the points. The defenders definitely hurt at times, but I think we still had enough of those value ones that made it easy. Especially Miami had several value options throughout the year. And Dallas had some options that made it easier to take some of these players. But for me, ultimately thinking back to the time, my favorite price change has always been players changing value based on their score to other players in their position. So depending on how well a defender does compared to other defenders, that's basing the change. And that was, I guess maybe 3 years now, whenever we had that system. And that was always my favorite, just because, like I said, I like our point system because it's based on how players do their job. I liked that price change system because it was price, did you succeed versus other defenders who were also succeeding, or fail versus other people, how much did you fail? So I enjoyed that system from a few years ago. But with what we have, based on what we had last year with this same algorithm, I did think this algorithm was better, but we probably could use some adjustments with defenders if that's possible. All right, so those are the 4 main changes I had. Did I miss anything that you guys want to bring out right now? Chat, is there anything that we missed, a change in the game this year? I know we had the 2 levels of prizes, so a little bit more prizes went out. We still had the prizes with the leagues here. Speak now, if ever hold your peace. Did we miss anything? All right, I think that's all the major stuff right here. A little bit of housekeeping before we get on to our fantasy awards. Just want to let everyone know for the MLS Fantasy Boss network of leagues, I have not announced the winners yet. Those leagues are, of course, the MLS Fantasy Boss official league, the r/fantasy MLS Reddit official league, and the Patreon league. I'm going to be reviewing teams and registrations tomorrow. I mostly just gave it a couple of days to see if there's any point adjustments that happen before I start going through. Just a reminder for everyone, of course, the way I do it is there's no double dipping allowed, so you can't win first place in all 3 and get all 3 things. For those of you in Patreon League, you don't have to worry about registration. You're already a Patreon member. I've got your registration right there, so you're covered with that, and I can get you taken care of. But if you do want to register, that's fine too. Never going to turn that down. But I'm going to go through and look everything up tomorrow. I think all the price changes have happened, and people will receive the highest prize that they qualify for. So if you didn't finish in the top 3, you are not out by any way, shape, or form right here, because if people didn't register, they're not eligible. So I've gone down to like into the teens before for people who get prizes here, and this is MLS gift cards to the MLS store. So if people have already won and if people didn't register, then I can get down there to 13, 14, 19, stuff like that. So you are not out of it. I'm going to be looking over that. I will be contacting people by email afterwards. You'll have a week to respond to my email, or I go down again to the next eligible person. So that's it. Just wanted to get that out there, that that will be coming out soon, and I'll make that announcement on Twitter for that. So good luck to everybody there. I hope that came through. Drum roll. Here we are, the Fantasy Awards. I had a couple of massive Twitter sessions over this past week where I sent out requests for Fantasy Award categories and then Twitter polls for nominees to see what we have. I reserve the right, we, the round table, reserve the right to overturn any vote that happened. Sorry for that, but it is definitely weighted, where I took a lot of consideration on what the people said they wanted. I think you guys did really well, but there are definitely some conversations I think we should have that may adjust some of our overalls. So let's start with the big one, guys. Fantasy Most Valuable Player. The 3 players that were nominated, we had Ladero, 137 fantasy points over 16 games. Pozuelo, 144 points over 19 games. And Santos over at Philadelphia with 85 points over 19 games. We may have had a couple others in the initial nominating, but these are the 3 guys who got the most nominees. The ultimate winner here is Ladero. Do you all agree with this? Because I think there could be a pretty big snub right here.
I'm okay with Ladero personally.
Okay with Ladero? Anybody? Does anybody think we're snub? I think Morgan right here with Miami, 149 points. I believe the top scoring midfielder in the game. Is that right? Did I get my numbers wrong? 149 points over 20 games. He was a pretty... Double check me, someone right there. Blaine, you had a weird look on your face.
I get the Morgan shout. I really do. 149 points over 20 games, but Ladero had 150 points over 17 games. If you take his average, Ladero's got an 8.82 average. That's 1.3 higher than everybody else who played at least 10 games in the entire thing. Pozuelo's at a 7.5. Morgan's at a 7.4. Rui Diaz is at a 7.4. It's going to be really hard to make a case that doesn't overshadow Ladero's 8.8 points a game this year. That's just too big, and he's the only player with 10 or more games that averaged higher than 8. And, he's 8.8. He's pushing 9. Your next best is, if you round it, Pozuelo at 7.6. That's just ridiculously high for Ladero, all things considered. If you're picking somebody else, you're not looking at the stats.
Everybody agree? Is it Ladero? I'm fine with it being Ladero. I just wanted to... I wanted to mention Morgan because he had the highest fantasy points. He was a beast with Miami this year, skyrocketed up with his value, was definitely the better premium Miami player to pick from throughout the year. So I wanted to mention him, at least have a little bit of conversation there.
Yeah,
but,
and if you do this, if we had a category for Breakout Player of the Year, Morgan would win it hands down. He is a guy that almost nobody knew coming into the season. Nobody expected anything from him, and he's the guy ending as a super premium coming out of nowhere. We all expected Ladero and Pozuelo to be at the top of this list. We could see Rui Diaz and Pedro Santos being up there. Jaime Montero from Philly being up there near the top isn't a huge shock given the way he's played. Morgan is the one that I don't think anybody would have had him as a top 10 fantasy prospect preseason.
Sure.
I think it's pretty obvious. Ladero and Pozuelo, obviously mentioning Discord again. Those were 2 players that the names every week were up there for which one are you taking, or are you somehow taking both? So obviously, to me, it came down to those 2. The reason I chose Ladero is because I had Pozuelo the week he had that penalty kick that he tried to, look cute on. And I remember that watching that game, I had my double screens on downstairs, one of which has 3 games on, one's got 2. So I'm watching it all, and my eyes turned to Toronto when he's getting the PK, and I'm getting excited, and I'm looking at my fantasy lineup, and then boom, he tries getting cute, and it just melted me. It hurts so bad. I don't know why, but I'm just a basic, boring soccer guy. You have a penalty, you just rip it and shoot it and score. You don't get fancy, don't do anything, just take your 2 steps and score. So that one really irritated me.
Yeah.
So I had to go with Ladero just out of spite.
No, I get it. Ladero had 69% of the vote right there with that poll. So yes, I would agree. Fantasy MVP. Let's go on to Fantasy Defender of the Year. Had several nominations here. The top three ended up being for the poll: Tenor Holm, Zimmerman, and McKenzie. Maybe some snubs here. I know we had several guys who did well. Ziegler was one that did well. Mensah was one that did well. Figueroa from Houston did well throughout the year as well. For a period of time, he was very high up there. But these are the three that got mentioned a lot in the nominations, and I think they're a good representation. Tenor Holm, 123 points over 20 games. Zimmerman, 126 points over 20 games. And McKenzie over there at Philadelphia, 130 points over 19 games. Just to throw out there, because I mentioned him, Mensah was 144 over 20 games. So what we have here as the final tally with 57% of the vote goes to Tenor Holm. Tenor Boom. One of my favorite defenders here. Do you all agree with this vote? Blaine, I see your head is shaking no.
No. If you're going to go, I'm a huge fan in this year for points per game. McKenzie 6.8 is best points per game of anybody. It's 0.5 clear of Zimmerman. And Tenor Holm actually comes in third on points per game. Maybe you give Tenor Holm some props because of what I'm going to say next. He did it with a slightly worse defense all the way around. But a name I would throw out there as probably one of my favorite candidates, and Jason might go nuts on me for this, but I like Donovan Pines. That defense was atrocious this year, and he finished top 10 in points, top 10 in points per game.
Really?
Playing for an atrocious defense, yes. I mean, he is maybe not top 10 for points. There's some guys down there that played more games, but points per game, he's definitely top 10. Only played 16 games, still managed 95 points.
Wow.
I would throw him out there because his offensive production was consistent there at the end. He is a guy you could count on. And defenders are such a weird thing in fantasy. Half the time you're banking on the team, not just the name. Pines was a guy you were banking on the name, not on the team. We talked about it. Zimmerman, you could take Zimmerman or you could take Romney, who has better points for the money you were spending. Tenor Holm was kind of that go-to guy, so I can see where he gets a lot of credit. McKenzie was just another face on a good defense. But, I mean, Pines there down the stretch, 16 games played and just way up there. I would be tempted to give him the nod on this just for everything he did. Playing for a worse team. I think if DC somehow fixes the defense next year, Pines is going to be one of those elite guys that we're all going to be after. I think he had a grand total of 1 clean sheet for the season, and he managed 95 points in 16 games. You look at everybody else; they've got more clean sheets than that. They're getting their points from somewhere else. Pines was just consistently one of those guys that was producing for fantasy outside of clean sheets.
One quick correction. I said 144 for Mensah. I meant 114 for Mensah. Mm-hmm. Jason, we heard some good things about Pines right there. Do you agree with that snub, or?
I mean, I would say I think I'd probably take Mark McKenzie, and I probably should have carried Mark McKenzie on my team a lot more than I did. But I had no idea, Blaine, that those numbers were what I was going to say, as like a shout out or something at the end of the show was, if you want to keep an eye on somebody for next season, Donovan Pines is a defender that I would keep an eye on, right? he, as Blaine said, the team was garbage, the back line was garbage. We, gave up so many goals, but he was the one for me, on the back line, was a great player this season. I just didn't realize that he got some headers, he got some goals. I just didn't realize he had done that well. So, I'd go Mark McKenzie, but definitely worth keeping an eye on, Blade, for sure. Yeah, I hadn't realized his numbers were that good.
Yeah, this one was tough for me, and I think this is sometimes where I find myself differing from some of the picks that Skylar makes on his articles for the top players is the price. of the player, and Zimmerman with that 13.1 million. I mean, I know he was aerial threat. I know he made the other defenders around him better, so he was definitely a defender of the year from MLS point of view candidate as an option. But Tenor Holm maintained a fairly reasonable price a lot of the year. He has been a consistent offensive threat for fantasy. I think he was 4-4, 4 goals and 4 assists, which is not shabby for a defender as a wing back. Decent number of clean sheets at times. Not the best year for New York City FC for clean sheet chances, but that has been something for him. So I am fine with Tenor Holm being the fantasy defender of the year, just because of him having a good balance between defensive point generation ability, offensive point generation threat, and a reasonable value, so he's attainable. Because that's the problem I have with Zimmerman. McKenzie's real close in this conversation too, because 11 wasn't too bad, but 13 was really like, well, I'm just going to get Romney. And is that someone who can be your fantasy player of the year when you're like, nah, give me the cheaper guy? And so that's a big impact for me. And I think Tenor Holm treads that line, because McKenzie was like that sometimes for me too. I was like, who could I get that's maybe a little bit cheaper in Philadelphia this time? But when I wanted a New York defender, it was Tenor Holm. When I wanted an offensive person, I'm usually thinking Tenor Holm and Awful as some of the first two names I'm thinking for offensive defenders. So I'm okay with that. Ari, Mike, you guys have anything? Do we need to break a tie or anything here?
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, the whole defending in general, I feel like, just kind of looking back at it, that was almost what I paid the most attention to this year, and I guess I give that 100% credit to me going with Mensa, week 2, week 3. I think I started and joined like the Discord and the Patreon in week 4. I was looking through and I didn't know anything about switcheroos or keeperoos, and I kind of bit my tongue on that when I saw my first 3 weeks of lineups. But once I joined it, I kind of learned about it. And I was going with Mensa those first few weeks when Columbus was on a tear. That's why I actually was one of the people in Twitter that did say Mensa as an MVP, just because when I think of defenders and how much value 1 point can mean. I mean, you get 1 point from anyone and you can jump your overall rank by 6, 7 people even. So when you get a guy like Mensa or Valenzuela or Aful, anyone on that Columbus backline at the beginning of the year that was getting a clean sheet 2 out of 3 games, to me that was huge. So I'm thinking that's 5 whole bonus points added to my team. That's a huge shift. Now, granted, I became the guy who couldn't let him go, even though he even though he started to decline quite a bit, or Columbus as a whole. But to me, that value of getting a clean sheet can be huge, because 5 points, I mean, that's the equivalent of a goal, and that's just getting a clean sheet. And, once again, you're playing a team who doesn't score much, or, you're playing like Minnesota. Whoever comes to Minnesota, they don't always score. That's big. And to look into that and find out who has the best probability on those clean sheets, to me, that's kind of fun. It's kind of exciting when you're watching the games going, can I make it the last 40 minutes with my guy in and get those 5 points? So yeah. I personally went with Mensa, but I'll give the nod to Tenor Holm. It's kind of hard to go against him.
Mike, I'll let you get the final voice here, since he is from your New York City FC.
Yeah, I mean, clearly I'm going to vote for Tenor Holm. The only thing, I think the price, is a big point in his favor. I think having most of his point production be offensive points was also great, because you weren't needing a clean sheet out of him. So you're a lot more free to pick him regardless of matchup. And finally, he has a nickname. He's Tenor Boom. None of these other guys have nicknames. Why are we even having this conversation?
There we go. No, I agree. That's it. You guys make some good arguments about McKenzie and about Zimmerman in particular, and Pines. But I'm going to go with the vote here that we had on Reddit, which was 57% for Tenor Boom for Tenor Holm. All right, number 3. This is the award for the fantasy player who was worth the price. I only had the final prices right here, but we had the top 3 players that were mentioned. Again, Santos, who ended at 9.4, Ladero, who ended at 14.3, and Morgan, who ended at 12.6. Not on this list, who I'm going to say is a snub, was Pozuelo, who was 12.9. I believe these players had been higher at times throughout the season. But we have those 3 players right here. If you guys think we should put Pozuelo in there, he was 12.9. But going to Reddit, the poll gave this one to Ladero with 45.8% of the vote. Do we agree with this one? Ladero, the MVP, does that automatically make him always worth the price?
I think it's hard to say no to that. I mean, like I said, every week it was Ladero or Pozuelo. And everyone said, oh my God, they're so expensive. But yet when it came down to 2 hours before game times and, even a half hour when the lineups were coming out, you never heard people say, oh, yeah, I don't have him in anymore. I subbed him out. Everyone always found a way to keep either Ladero or Pozuelo in. And at least from what it sounds like, obviously as a rookie, I didn't know about last year, but they were very expensive players. You had to really think about, if I take them, what am I going to sacrifice?
Yep.
Someone like me who likes or who's willing to spend a little more on defenders, that was a big issue for me. And that's why towards the end of the season, I started saying, risk it for the biscuit. I'm gonna not play either Ladero or Pozuelo and try for someone else. But I think it's a pretty clear-cut winner, Ladero, and yes, I think Pozuelo did get snubbed for that reason.
Yeah, maybe Pozuelo should have been on here. I mean, Santos at 9.4 isn't too bad of a price. For me, what ultimately takes this is exactly what you were saying, Ari. When you're looking at what you have to sacrifice, if you're looking at a Toronto player, you're going to be going with Pozuelo. Very rarely were you even going to consider Josie, or if you wanted to go with somebody else, there were going to be a budget already with Mullins right there. So there you had it. With Philadelphia, it was the same way. I mean, you were probably going to go with Shabilko. If not him, then maybe Aronson. I mean, it wasn't this tough decision. But when you were talking about Seattle, I mean, you were looking at Rui Diaz, you were looking at Jordan Morris, and you were looking at Ladero, and those were very real decisions you had to make to yourself of like, am I going to be able to afford 2 of those guys? If I can only afford 1, who do I want? And for me, it always became Ladero. That could be because I have a midfielder bias with that money, but when you had those legitimate tough decisions of, man, do I want to get my eggs in the basket of Rui Diaz or Jordan Morris, who is also fairly expensive at times as well throughout this season. For me, many times it was like Ladero. He's worth that extra money because of the potential that he has.
Yeah. I think this conversation is perfect for the price per fantasy point metric to come in. And it's kind of a toss-up here. Morgan, Santos, and actually Valeri, who we haven't talked about, all hit in that mid 80,000 per point. Ladero's 96 with the way the season ended. Pozuelo's 90. This number really changes. It's like at what point, or the big question I like to ask is, at what point are you spending money and not getting a good return on it? Can you downgrade Ladero to somebody else and still get a good return on the money you're spending? And the answer at times was yes. About the point where that drops off is around the Valeri mark. That's when you start seeing, if you're going to take somebody other than Valeri, you start dropping off drastically on your points production. And it's a weird one. I think, all things considered, with the MVP race and everything, Morgan gets my vote for it.
Price?
I think he's got the points per the money spent, plus he's got the overall top score. I mean, he hits both the value side and the top score side together. That really he is the most important, or the best bang for your buck you could get all the way around. Not sacrificing your ceiling for your whole team, but making the smartest use of your money you can get.
A fair argument. I think ultimately we're going to go with Ladero, though, since we are talking about spending the big money, and if you're willing to pull that trigger, Blaine makes an excellent argument for bang for buck, which maybe that should have been one of our rewards. But for spending this money, we're going to give it to Ladero. Okay, let's move on to the next one. This one I really enjoyed, and I think there is at least one legitimate conversation here. This is the fantasy flop of the year. Looks like it's a no-brainer. We have Chicharito, we have Altador, and we have Gonzalo Higuain right here. And right now on Reddit, it's closed, so there's not going to be any more votes. 89.3% to Chicharito right here as the fantasy flop of the year. And I'm going to go ahead and say what the conversation is that I want to have, and that is, should it be Higuain? Because they have a lot of parity in how much, at least at one point, maybe not at the end it got a little weird, but at one point in the season, Higuain had played as much as Chicharito and had not done any better when he was supposed to have this big impact and just go away with, or just go crazy here. And he was not putting those goals in the back of the net as you would want. So is Higuain, maybe doesn't take it away from Chicharito, but should he be more than 6.8% of this vote? Is Higuain a fantasy flop on the same level of Chicharito? What do you all think? No, Blaine, we were having this conversation.
Yeah, I was going to see if anybody else was going to chime in.
Go ahead, Jason.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we were having the conversation earlier. I mean, I was going to vote for Higuain because I guess I didn't pay too much attention to Chicharito, frankly. Like, I just wasn't paying that much attention to him. So I just figured he wasn't playing enough. But Reed, you're saying that they played about the same amount? I don't know. I mean, I think I would still give it to Higuain. I definitely wouldn't give it to Josie because, I mean, he didn't play at all. How can he flop if he's not playing?
No, I think that's fair. I mean, I feel like people threw him in there more because of what they expected out of him.
Because Josie gets a lot of hate.
Because Josie gets a lot of hate. No, I think Josie has done wrong being on this list. I think it really does come down to, let me see if I can find the numbers real quick, because that was a stat I heard earlier in the season. So let's go. Inter Miami, Higuain at the end of the season, or at least as much as the fantasy game is going to give me stats for, he played 802 minutes, 1 goal, and 2 assists. So those are his final scores. Meanwhile, looking over at Chicharito, at the end of the fantasy season, he played 668 minutes with 1 goal. So he's played about 140 fewer minutes right here. So at one point, we're looking at when Higuain was around that 600-minute mark is when they were being compared, and he had really only had 1 goal. So now that he's played more minutes, that's the argument. I mean, I could see Higuain being the bigger flop because he was billed as supposing to be so much of a savior for Miami, coming in mid-season, give them this boost, make them be successful. Chicharito was a huge signing for LA, but they still had those pieces with Pavone that were around there, and everyone that they had with Dos Santos that could be a part of that team. Chicharito was the star, but I lean towards Higuain as my vote, but Chicharito is so overwhelming in the poll that I'm okay giving it to Chicharito. But what about you, Ari? What do you think?
Yeah, I was just kind of looking also at the MLS standings regarding that for fantasy player, because both players, Higuain and Chicharito, when they came into this league, I mean, the buzz around them was huge. And you're expecting it to be. They're supposed to be, everyone says you come here from Europe. Like, Europe is a lot of these guys come from these top leagues, etc. So you get a guy like Higuain coming from Juventus, you expect he's going to come in and kind of run the show in Miami. And that didn't seem to be the case, as we see with, like, Morgan. Morgan was kind of the star of the team. And when you look at something like that, you almost think, like, yeah, like, it never really hit me. I'm looking at Higuain's stats, and you're like, I expected, you expect a little more out of somebody coming from such a top-tier club and joining just the way he joined. You expect more from him, and I don't think I saw that. So, yeah, I think looking back at it, I should have picked Higuain. I think I clicked Altador just because I had no clue and wanted to find in. And, it's Altador, so I still remember U.S. Trinidad and Tobago type game. So, still salty on that one. So I just said Altador. But no, honestly, I think looking at you kind of have to go Higuain. As much as Chicharito was like bad, I think the hype around him joining Inter Miami and not performing is crazy because they, like I said, they made the playoffs. So I guess we'll see how he steps up for his team during playoffs. But he really didn't shine like most people were expecting him to.
So Shannon made a really good point in chat right now, and I could really look to this as justifying a Chicharito vote. Chicharito made the other players worse. Like, I mean, we know that when Chicharito did not play, Pavone was great. Like, you almost like, hey, Chicharito's not playing great. Give me Pavone. That's awesome. But when Chicharito played, he subtracted from the fantasy potential. I do remember people talking about Higuain saying that there were times when he wasn't taking shots because he was sort of becoming a distributor because he didn't have all those great pieces to just send in the ball. I mean, he had Morgan and he had some others, but he didn't have as much as he had when he was at like Juve. So I see Shannon's point, and that would make me comfortable going with Chicharito again. He was a negative impact on the fantasy potential, where Higuain just didn't live up to our expectation.
And I don't feel like we're being fair to Higuain here. And I said this before the show, and I think it's a good time to bring it up here. And it's kind of one of those fantasy rules you live by. We said it on the show. We said it multiple times. I want to see a mid-season transfer perform before I invest. Higuain came in at 9 to 10 million. He was fairly expensive. I wanted him to prove it before I would take him. I didn't put him in my lineup once this year, and he cannot be considered a flop for me because of that.
Fair.
We have a history of this. Dempsey came in. We all have fond memories of Dempsey in MLS doing crazy things for the fantasy game. His first year, he sucked. Everybody's first year, especially if it's half a season, they really suck. You don't take them in fantasy. I think the only mid-season transfer that had wild success in the fantasy game is Ladero. That's the only one I can think of that had wild success. So if you're going to call Higuain a flop because he didn't produce, you shouldn't take him in the first place. Like, that's just one of those golden rules you go by. Higuain got 38 points in 9 games. That's not good, but that's not terrible. Your flop this year is Josie Altador. He got 34 points in 11 games. That's it. He played more games, more minutes than Higuain and got fewer fantasy points. He is on the second best team in MLS this year, 5 points per game. He got 34 fantasy points. Ayo Akinola looked great when he was healthy. Outscored Josie. This team is built to supply a striker. This team has pieces. Josie did nothing with the supporting cast that was around him. I'll give Chicharito a pass. It's his first year in the league, and he is playing on an awful team. This team is so top-heavy with Pavone and Leggett, and then they've got a bunch of kids that we don't trust to do anything. I don't know who on that team outside of Pavone I was ever even interested in taking other than Leggett a few weeks. LA doesn't have a team around them. Chicharito is not the guy that's going to create for everybody else. He's the guy that relies on everybody else to create for him. That's the way he's played his entire career. He doesn't have guys around him outside of Pavone that are really creating for him, and he and Pavone were competing a little too much. I didn't expect as much from Chicharito. I never put him in my lineup this year either. Just the way LA played, where they finished in the overall table, everything about LA said, avoid this team. Everything about Toronto said, grab these players should do good, and Josie sucked this year. 34 points is all you need to know from a striker on the number 2 team in MLS.
Works. I have been swayed by Shannon and some of the conversations that we have here, so I am going to certify what we have on Twitter and go with Chicharito as the fantasy flop of the year with 89.3% of the vote. Moving on to number 5. This one's a fun one. This is the fantasy scrub of the year. And so maybe this one won't last to next year, or maybe the name wasn't right. But this is the guy. This is the scrub that you always wanted to have on your team to make your switcheroos work. I mean, this is the guy that was always going to be there. I will say that I missed out on 12 points off my bench for Rossi in this week 14 because my Vancouver scrub came in and played for 1 minute. So thanks a lot, guys. Thanks a lot. Anyway, so what we have here for our top three, there were several other guys that were mentioned, but here are the three that ended up being on top. We have Ben Lunt, the FCC keeper. We have Gianfranco Facciarini, which I don't know if you all just suggested that one to hear me try to say it or not, but a Vancouver defender who was traded to a Canadian Premier League team, but stayed in the game. And then Kyle Adams, Houston defender, 4.0 guys right here. And this was a fairly close one, and some of it probably depended on the position you were going for, but with 45.2% of the vote, it went to Facciarini, the Vancouver defender. I am okay with this one just because he was loaned to the Canadian Premier League team. So, like, the guy was not going to come back, so he was locked in as a scrub. It's not a guy with a knock, not a guy like I suffered from who came on at the last 1 minute of playtime, but it was a guy who was not going to play because he was no longer in the team because he was loaned, but still in the game. Reminded me of the days where if you got a player in your team at the first week who ended up not being there and he was taken out of the selection, if you had him in your team, he would stay there. You just had to live with that guy forever, but as a 4.0 scrub. So I don't know if you guys want to talk much about this one because I think I'm all behind this. Unless you guys have another name, are we going to go with Facciarini, the Vancouver defender, 4.0?
JoJo summed it up best. Yep. Facciarini had one of the latest kickoff times. If he wasn't in the first part of the double game week, that's what got my vote for Facciarini. Yeah. You're always looking at that kickoff time, and there's a West Coast bias here, and Facciarini being sold or loaned out or whatever, absolutely no chance to play on a West Coast time slot. Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't realize the dude had been loaned out. I just kept looking every week, and I was like, "Oh, he's not available." Okay,
that's what it was. I mean, it took me a second to dig for it, but yeah, I think that's what it was. He was loaned to a Canadian Premier League.
I will say he's no Tom. Was it this guy Thomas Duty? Right? Wasn't there a guy who played for Chicago a few years ago? I think I used him a lot as a scrub. This was like 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. But the Vancouver guy.
I went with both Facciarini, if that's how you pronounce his name, and Adams all year. Those are my two. I wrote them out the entire year. Pretty much from the moment I asked on Discord, once I learned about switcheroos in like week 4, and I learned like, oh, so you want to play somebody that is guaranteed not going to play, and you don't have to worry about him coming in for a minute. And yeah, it was definitely both of those guys. So I'm giving, it's a coin flip for me on those two, but whoever you chose, whoever gets second in that group, I would give them just as much of the reward as I give because they both were perfect.
The only thing that would keep me from giving Adams a second place here is if you run, and this is some switcheroo 201 right here, but if you run 2 defenders as switcheroos and you have them both in the field, you have to have 3 defenders for legal formation. So if you have 2 defenders on your bench, you're going to get those players regardless of what your third player does, unless you have a third scrub on the field, and in which case, why even bother doing a switcheroo? Unless you've had so much money, you can just swap them out. I guess you're going from an auto switcheroo here. So I would prefer to have a defender and then maybe a midfielder or a forward as the pairing right here. And we had several 4.0 forwards I think you could have looked at as well. But that's just, maybe that's 2021 thoughts right there. But just be careful if you ever run 2 4.0 defenders as your switcheroo or your auto options, because it could easily not work out for you. Let's move on to number 6. This one's interesting. A lot of names thrown around. So I went with these 3, but I could definitely see other names if you guys want to mention them. The Fantasy Boom or Bust Player of the Year. Now, these are the guys. Number 5 was the player you were using for your switcheroo. These are basically the guys for number 6 who were your switcheroos. They were the guys on your bench that you wanted to preview their score to find out if you wanted to keep them. These are those guys that could give you a 2 or could give you a 12. I mean, this is the kind of player, the boom or bust players that we had. This one was tight, and the top 3 nominations that we had were Castellanos over there with New York City FC, BWP at LAFC, and then Jordan Morris over at Seattle. So Castellanos had 78 points over 19 games, 5.5 million forward, 6 goals, 3 assists. BWP was 71 points over 15 games, 7.9 million, 5 goals, 6 assists. And then Jordan Morris was 116 points over 19 games, 10 million, 9 goals, 6 assists. So that's where we have. And with a vote of 42.9%, we have Castellanos as... I'm so sorry. I'm sure I'm butchering this. As the winner right here. It was tied with Jordan Morris for the longest time, but Jordan Morris was second with 41.4. I'm inclined to go with this just because of that 5.5 million. I mean, that's an easy switcheroo to have, but if you had the money going with, if you could have Jordan Morris in there, I mean, that was a powerful and potent switcheroo at times. So I'm interested in hearing what you guys think about this one.
So the votes got it wrong.
We have another name. If you have another name, throw it out.
No. Well, it's just Tati Castellanos had 4 games total where he scored more than 3 points. When I'm judging a boom or bust player,
sure,
I want a reasonable chance in 19 games to have about 10 of those where you score more than 3 points. I'm not going to be picking a guy who is scoring 1s and 2s for the first 10 rounds. He did not get his first score above 3 until week 10 versus DC. He had played a bunch of games up to that point. Like, that's not a guy I'm looking at for a boom or bust. If you're looking at that, 4 booms on the whole season over 19 games is not enough to do it. Morris, I ran some numbers. I've got a whole list of stuff that I'll share that you guys can talk about. Morris had 5 games with at least 10 points and 7 games with a goal. His peak outside of that was 4 points. Zardes had 8 games with a goal. Everything else was a 2 or a 3. That's a boom or bust player. 8 out of about 20 hitting is okay. Mueller with Orlando, 7 games with a goal, 4 weeks above 10. DK, 7 games with the goal, 3 weeks above 10. Those are the guys that you're looking boom or bust. Outside of that, they were rocking 2s and 3s for the most part. Mueller actually had a better average, so he may not make a boom or bust list. And these are all guys I would put above Tati in the listing. Kyoto, 6 games with the goal, 4 weeks above 10. A surprising one that I really liked was Krylock had 7 games with the goal, and 2 of those weeks he had at least 10, but he was there. And then guy we talked about earlier, defender, is Donovan Pines. He had 5 weeks above 10 points.
We had a late entry of Kevin Molino as well.
Yeah, I didn't run the numbers on Molino. I should. But Pines, with only a few clean sheets for the year, 5 weeks above 10 points when you're not clean sheet hunting, that's a guy you throw in. And I'm only counting 5 weeks above 10 points. He had plenty of 8s and 9s in there that I didn't calculate in. So he played 14 games. He's looking at over half of his games being 8 points or better. That's a huge production from a boom or bust guy. When I ran all the numbers, I think I would have to give boom or bust player to Pines, with the close second being probably Morris, just because of the number or his total points. But Pines was that guy that about 50% of the time you were expecting a hit and you were getting a hit. And when you look at a boom or bust, you want more of those highs than lows, but they're not quite steady enough to be like an every week type of inclusion. And so just raw numbers, I like Pines. I think of the guys listed in your poll, Morris is probably the best. I mean, 5 above 10, that's best. That's tied with Pines for the best, and he had 7 different games with a goal. A couple of those multi-goal games, I didn't count assists, but I think of the ones you listed, if you're not going to go defenders, because I know we don't really pick defenders as boom or bust, I think Morris is your hands down best. I know the price was a little higher, but he hit so many more times. He was a guy you were willing to sacrifice the money on. I can't believe Tati had 4 booms and gets the vote here, because You're not looking at a boom or bust guy for 4 solid weeks that all come late in the season. I think that's recency bias coming into play.
Yeah, I can definitely move away from Toddy with this one. My Mike says no. Just a second.
Oh, I'm going to defend him.
Go for it. Go for it. My anti Pines is his 9, his 11, and his 10 in the first 7 weeks of the game all came from clean sheets. And while that's a solid point generator for defenders, it can be a fluke. It can not be them. It's not something you really depend upon. He then gets 3 goals in the later half of the season. And if this was something more consistent, if Pines was a more consistent goal threat throughout the season, then I could be okay with that. But with him being so clean sheet heavy right now, that's why, I mean, and I get that. But then you throw any defender in there of like, well, I mean, everybody on DC got these clean sheets. They could up, but I hesitate for Pine just because his booms were so clean sheet heavy.
But Reed, I said he had 5 weeks above a 10. Only one of those I think was a clean sheet week. Above a 10.
There were 2 of them that were clean sheet weeks. The other 3 were from goals, and they were in the last half of the season. Yeah. 2 of that was in. Like I said, if I had a couple of goals at the beginning of the season, or even one at the first part of the season, I could be more with that. DC was struggle bus though, so I mean I get all of that, but definitely a guy to look out for. But I struggle to overturn Tati and Jordan Morris for someone who was so clean sheet heavy for his booms.
That is why my final vote went to Morris. I think with defenders you are watching some of that. I think hitting more than you miss down the stretch, even without the clean sheets, is a pretty big benefit to him. But I don't think anybody's really playing boom or bust off of defenders. You're clean sheet hunting with defenders and then switching out of that,
right?
Which makes every defender a boom or bust every week.
Mike, defend Tati.
Okay, so part of the problem that I have with Blaine's analysis is that Tati was not a boom or bust player the entire season. Because the beginning part of the season, he was alternating with Ebert. So, like, for most of those seasons, like, really, we're only talking about 10 games where Tati was the starting striker. One, he's so much cheaper than Jordan Morris. When we're talking about boomer bust with Jordan Morris, what's going boomer bust is your fantasy team, not just Tati Castellanos. Because you're paying $10 million for a 2-point sometimes. It's not just, like, boomer bust. Like, that's insane. Because you can take that $6 million and upgrade one of your midfielders so you could have both Ladero and Pozuelo. So to me, this isn't even a conversation. You have a $4 million striker who 4 out of the 10 times where he was in this role was hitting double digits. That's huge. And not only did he generally hit it, he generally hit it big. Like, you had 24 points in there against the Red Bulls. Like, that makes your switcheroo. That's exactly what you're talking about as the ideal candidate, and it frees up money for you to bring in another player in the switcheroo if it doesn't work, or you can upgrade somewhere else if he does hit. So to me, he's the absolute prototypical player. To me, Jordan Morris isn't in this conversation. The only person who's in this conversation is BWP because he had that price point earlier in the season and was hitting those numbers. I think it's Tati Castellanos because he had the cheapness and because BWP kind of got heavy. Like, generally where BWP really would have been awesome would be in the MLS's back tournament, and unfortunately we couldn't play him then. But so if we're talking about over the season, maybe there's a conversation. But to me, Jordan Morris is just too expensive for this proposition.
I actually am gonna disagree there and side on Blaine on this one. Now hear me out. I'm kind of an all-in or all-out type of guy, and with Morris, in terms of boom or bust, you are right in that. Like, when you take him, you are risking your whole team is kind of boom or bust because he is so valuable at that position, and you are kind of taking that risk because you're talking about Seattle, a team that has plenty of offensive threats with Rudiaz, Ladero, etc. Like, so when you're taking him, to me, that is a big, huge boom or bust because not only are you risking the money factor of it, of like I'm taking a $10 million player who could get me 2 points, but I'm also risking it by taking somebody who, yes, he's not price-wise, but there are way too many threats on that team that can score. So, like it was said in Discord a while back, Ladero, there was that one game against San Jose where, 7 goals go in, and yet a player may only get, like Ladero only got, 8 points, while everybody else is getting 20s and 17s. And so to me, a guy like Morris, you're risking it by not only taking a guy who is 10 million, but also the opportunity that team could have a great game and he just wasn't involved enough in the play. It all went from Ladero to Rudiaz. Or, if you're looking at Minnesota this last week, it was all Reynoso and Molino. I did look up the stats on Molino too. Credit, I think it was Patrick in the chat who said it. He's probably a candidate I would put in there now. Looking at his stats, he had a 10, a 14, a 13, and a 15. But the rest were all 1s, 2s, and a 5. 3 1s, 1, 2, and a 5. So to me, that is definitely a shout out. I think I'm going with Morris, but I give credit to Molino because, he either scores 2 goals or a goal and an assist, or he plays 10 minutes and then gets subbed out for an injury, sadly. So I'm going with Morris and Blaine.
Jason, what do you think here? We might have to have a tiebreaker.
Oh, man.
No pressure.
I boomed on Tati and Castellanos, and I boomed on Jordan Morris both. I'm just going to throw in Ilsinho because I don't know. It's just,
He muddies the waters. Not
so much this season, but last season I was always like, Ilsinho, I'll throw him on my bench. Maybe he'll show up and score a hat trick in 15 minutes, or maybe he'll do absolutely nothing. So.
Okay, so what I have to say about Kevin Molino is I find Kevin Molino to be a more of a consistent producer. Like it wasn't necessarily like, is he going to get me a 1 or is he going to get me a 14? It was like, am I going to get a 6 or a 7 or am I going to get a 12? That kind of thing. So it's like, am I going to get a solid game out of Molino or an awesome game from Molino? Then he had some injuries, and some of those bust points there come from him playing 30 minutes or things like that. So I think Molino is a very valid name for this conversation, but I think he's more of a consistent player that had some awesome points and then had some low points from injuries. Jordan Morris, I see what you're saying with it's like, am I going to go with him and hurt my fantasy team? Not necessarily is he going to boom or bust. Is it going to be they were going with Ruidiaz, Ladero, or that? Man, this one is tough. What ultimately gets it for me and makes me go with Castellanos. What makes me go with Tati is what Mike said about him having this rotation. At the beginning of the season, he was not the guy you were going to be playing. So when he had all these busts, it was because he was coming in for 16 minutes. He was coming in for 5 minutes. And it wasn't even a guy you were considering because he was this sub. And he wasn't even a super sub. He was just a guy that was going to come in here because New York City FC was still trying to figure out what in the world they were doing with their coach and with their front attack. But once he started getting consistent minutes, and we're looking at around week 8 here, or around that double game, when he started consistently playing 90 minutes, that's when he got, is it a 2, or is it a 13 all of a sudden, or is it nothing? Then I get a hat trick and an assist and all this stuff, like the way he rounded out the year. So I think for the period, even though it's a smaller period and a more recent period of time when this player became fantasy viable, that it was much more of, well, I'm either going to get a double-digit point here or I'm going to get 2 points. And I think that was Tati. Jordan Morris, I think you usually had a hope of a more reliable score from. So I will I will certify the voting as done by the members of Twitter.
Yeah, Reed, I think hearing you say that, I think we've got kind of a disconnect in how we do this, and chat can weigh in, we can weigh in, whatever it is. It's just, at a certain price point, and Tati is there, you don't really consider, I don't really start considering them boom or bust players. They're not a guy like I'm looking at, it's like, oh, I'm going to throw him on my bench. DK was there when he first started getting starts. Frank O'Hara from Dallas is there. They are so cheap, you can throw them on your bench and you don't have to make a choice. They're all upside. There's no downside to taking them. and Tati definitely fits that. I think he finished at 5.5 or under 6.
Like, he did.
Yeah, what's the downside to taking him? You're
getting 2 points. I mean, that's the thing. Getting 2 points. Yeah. That's the beauty is that that's the design of this is boom or bust doesn't. We don't have to have the same way of doing it.
Yeah.
But
it's just at a certain point I start looking at it, it's like, oh well, I'm not going to look at that value player as a boom or bust. I'm spending 1.5 million over a scrub to get a chance at some decent points, and I can use that money elsewhere. Like, that's just solid roster building when you've got to fill in a spot and you're looking for Ottaru candidates.
Well, it doesn't matter. There's nothing that says that just common sense budget management can't play into a boom or bust player. So, but I am certifying this vote right here. Castellanos Tati is getting 42.9% and the fantasy boom or bust player of the year. Moving on to number 7. This is I never really phrased this the way I quite wanted to, but I think everybody got the idea. So this is the team that was most impacted fantasy point-wise by a player loss. And the teams that were in consideration here, we had Atlanta, LAFC, and New England, considering Martinez and Vela and Carles Gil. At the time. So overwhelmingly 70.3%, probably does not need a discussion here, but we have Atlanta as the winner. Columbus potentially could have been in this conversation as well when they didn't have Zelorion for a while as well, but I think Atlanta deserves this spoon. I don't know, this pity right here. I don't know. Does anybody disagree that Atlanta was not the most impacted by the loss of a player fantasy-wise?
Agreed. I want to say, I think everybody took this in the negative tone, most impacted by a loss negatively. I think if we open this up and people actually thought about it positively, LA Galaxy, when Chicharito was out, they instantly became fantasy viable all the way around. Like, if you're looking at impact, with Chicharito gone, I was willing to pick up their guys. Chicharito starting, I dump everybody. It doesn't matter. I dump everybody. It's so
he just wasn't hurt long enough. If he'd been hurt longer, they'd have made the playoffs.
Yeah.
All right.
The only thing I would counter to that really with Atlanta, like, Joseph just brought the whole team down and they really had no viable options after that. I think there's 2 ways to look at it. It's like Joseph went down, don't pick anybody from Atlanta anymore. They're not holding the ball up. They're not generating an offense. The other one was I love New England. After Gil went down, it opened up so many options all the way around. Let me pull up their stats. I had them up a minute ago. We've got all these names, but Bunbury ended the season with 83 points. He's a guy we don't normally count on. Buxa got 68. That's another pretty solid score. Buchanan as a forward got 56. He played in all 20 games. It changed things. I think we dumped Atlanta players, and that makes it an easy pick to say, yeah, they were the most impacted by missing a player. Nobody was viable. But I think the Gil injury changed how New England had to play, and it brought some of these other names into contention. Bunbury ended the season at 7.5. Buxa is 6.2. These were guys you could easily stash on your bench for some cheap points throughout the week, and they hit pretty well. I mean, an 83 and a 68 are respectable scores for guys in those mid price points. And I think that only happens because Gil is out like he is. And so honorable mention to New England on this. You can't overstate how important some of this is to fantasy when a key player goes down and other people have to step up and they still do well. Atlanta was just that massive train wreck. They lost their one key guy and everything fell apart. Nobody was fantasy viable anymore. And it's just avoid at all cost. And that's crazy to see in this game. I don't think I've ever seen a year where one player goes down and you're not even looking at his replacements really.
Oh, for sure.
You're just like, nope, avoid the team.
For sure. I mean, you could make also a strong argument for Vela being gone because not only did that make BWP and Rossi much more desirable at times, but it freed up fantasy managers to not always captain Vela, and which I guess it sort of became always captain Ladero or always captain Pozuelo, but it still did give you some more flexibility with that. But I think what you said there, Blaine, at the end, that with Joseph leaving and then not having Barco and everybody there step up to really be viable players, and then having just the mass exodus there, it was like Atlanta just wasn't even worth it, and that was because Joseph left that the team just collapsed, and it made them not fantasy worthy and bet against at times. So I think we're good with Atlanta here. Okay, and here's the final category, just sort of the catch-all, the fun category, and the last one that we'll do for tonight. And this is not a poll, but who did I snub? Who did I not have here? And Blaine dinged me for not putting up some other categories, like a newcomer of the year, and then Dan Wright suggested a bargain of the year. Or maybe this where Castellanos should have been for a fantasy bargain. Maybe that would have been a better category next year, Dan. We'll do that next year. But who did I snub with this list, or who did we snub during our conversation? Anybody else?
I can for sure say one that Blaine and I both agreed on, and I know we talked earlier. But Dane St. Clair, call it a homer pick. That's fine. But, he really, we were talking about Willis a lot and all these other keepers, but it really hit me as I'm looking at his stats to get 6 clean sheets out of 13 games, to almost go a straight 50% with a defense that kept being jumbled. You have a guy like Chase Gasper who gets yellow cards all the time, so you're always worried about if he's going to play the next game, etc. And then with, Iko Para being out for the season, which threw us all for a loop, and then we bring in DeBasi, and everyone's kind of shifting positions, and Coleman came back for these last 2 games. And you're kind of up in the air on what Heath's going to do in general with his game plan. To have a guy like a 23-year-old Dane St. Clair to be able to still keep those clean sheets. Granted, we do have the goalpost as part of our friend because that did save us a few. But he made some miraculous saves, and he kind of manned the helm on defense. He was a loud vocal voice, and he was able to make that defense run as a unit. And when he needed to, he would make the stop. So I know, like I said, as Blaine said, I stole his thunder, which I didn't. I apologize to him, but dude, you got to give it to St. Clair. That man was insane this year for when he started and how much he jumped in price because of it. I think that just shows he would be my kind of MVP or newcomer of the year sort of deal. I would definitely look at him.
Ari, you're wearing the crest. You deserve to do that.
Thank you.
Introduce your guy. The only thing I would add is he ended the season at 11.1 or 11.3. He started out, didn't play a game until week 5, right? Week 5. He got 9 weeks in. He started at 4 million. He went up almost every single week. If he had done max price point over that, his maximum potential price for where he started is 13 million. Maximum total the system would allow is 13 million. He ended up over 11. That means 2 weeks he didn't get a full price rise. And I think he may have gone down in the last week. Yeah, his week change is -8. So before this last week where he's priced himself out, the Chicago game where he got a 3 was enough to drop him 0.8. He was at an 11.9. And his system maximum was 13 this season. That's dominance in a system that allows price change like this. Even midfielders don't rise like that and stay like that. That's just insane.
Well, I haven't heard too many snubs right now. You guys mentioned some good ones just now. You guys mentioned some good ones there. I guess a shout out to Leanne that came from Ari for best guest podcast host right there. So that was sweet to have it mentioned right there.
I might have stolen the thunder now that I'm on, but that's a whole separate thing.
Well, great. Thank you so much, guys. So those are our fantasy awards. I'll try to make some fun little graphics or something and put them up on Twitter. Maybe we'll get some retweets or likes from the teams out there. But guys, it's been a fantastic season. Everybody, y'all listening, it's been a fantastic season. I know it started out weird. Thank you for those of you who stuck with us through some of the content filler podcasts that we did, the fantasy Mount Rushmore, the trips down fantasy history, and all of that. It was a lot of fun doing those older posts. I know that we had the reason of COVID-19, and I'm hope that the podcast did something to help keep people going during this time. I had some suggestions of having like a COVID impacted team or a COVID impacted player as an award, and I just wasn't going to do that just because it is still a serious thing that people are dealing with, and so I don't want to make light of it. But great news about potential vaccines that came out today, and so we hope for a lot of that progress there. But I'm so glad you guys were able to stay with us during this journey, and I'm so glad for all of the messages I've seen on Twitter about how well people have done. I'm flattered that people are attributing some of that to me or this podcast or the communities that have been built around. I mean, I'm just putting this stuff together, and so there's great people in these communities who I think equally need to be showered with praise and highlighted for the work that they've done, not just in building like Older Goaler does with building the communities and everybody helping here, and Blaine and Mike with the podcast, but other people who are there, Haitian Zavi and Black and Red and Mr. Frumble and all those people who are down there at Discord and everybody, and the guests that we've had on the show. I mean, lots of people are coming together, and I'm so glad that people are able to get this content and have fun with this game and this sport that we're all so passionate about, and that's really what it's all about at the end. So from what we've heard from James, there will be a 2021 game, so I am excited for that. If people have feedback, I'll get a survey up to see about what people want. I'm thinking about trying to do some more videos next year for some content, so I hope that might be able to be consumed pretty easy for people who aren't always able to listen to the podcast or just different time zones and things. So some stuff in the works, but thanks so much, guys, for listening. Let's do the plugs right here real quick. There we go, as we wrap it up. So start with you, Blaine.
Yeah, I'm going to take one from Shannon, too. Major shout-out to Felix. Came on the show this year, finished 4th overall.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he got clipped in the last week and dropped to number 4. I think he was, if I'm looking at the stats right, he was, I guess, number 2 going into the week. He would have been a little bit behind. Field projections, Jeff Jones, friend of mine from Facebook League we play, he would have been just a few points behind. He did enough to kind of close the gap there, but he got passed by a couple of guys. And then give a shout out to Ryan Anderson, who's a guest on the show quite a bit. He finished 5th overall this year. So a few guys in my circle finishing there in the top 5 always makes me happy. But love seeing our guests do well. And Felix and Ryan, both 4 and 5 is just a huge year, and got to give them their praise.
Jason.
Okay, I wrote mine down, so I wouldn't forget them. I have 3 soccer-related ones that are DC United specific and 2 non-soccer related ones. I want to shout out Ben Olsen and thank him for all of his contributions to DC United. So I'm going to shout out Ben Olsen. I'm also going to keep your eyes on Moises Nyman, Kevin Paredes, and Griffin Yao, who are the 3 homegrowns for DC United this year who got a lot of playing time. And I hope they get to play more next year. And I'm putting in my vote for Jill Ellis to take over as manager for DC United. So those are my 3 DC United shout-outs, my non-soccer shout-outs. I have 4 people whose names I'm going to put on this podcast, and they're never going to listen to it anyway, but I told them I would shout them out. Logan, Nicole, Kim, and Leah. I'm just saying your names. And finally, totally not soccer, but I think it needs to be done. We need to pour one out for Alex Trebek, the late, great Alex Trebek. So those are my shout outs right there.
Very nice. Ari.
I have a few also. First off, the whole Discord community. As a rookie coming into the league, you panic some weeks. You have one really good week, and then you realize the next week when prices go up and everything goes up, and all of a sudden you go from having a budget to being $9 million over, and your hair's falling out. The community kind of picks you up and takes that weight off your shoulders, gives you enough advice, and I can't thank all of them enough that were in there that, like Samurai Panda, I think I asked him about 50 questions. So I got to give him the shout out. All three of you guys on the podcast, because it's something to look forward to on, mainly Mondays, especially to wind down yet still like kind of hang out with people, especially during COVID. And it's hard to kind of go out and see a lot of people. So to be able to hop on and just kind of interact on YouTube during this session, that's always a fun one. Shout out to my league that I'm in, True North Elite. There were 16 of us in there. Spencer,
Nice.
in that league, he was third pretty much the entire year. And then the final 3 weeks, he said, I'm going to win. And he passed me. And Corey Burrington, who is also one of the top 3 fighting for it. And then whoever made We Need Zlatan Back League, because I joined that in week 1. I have no clue what it was, but it was head-to-head. I started in first. I finished in first. And I think once I checked and I was in second. No clue how, but I kept winning every single week. So that was really cool. But yeah, mainly I'm giving a shout out to you 3 because once I got onto it, it was awesome. And I'm totally hooked. And I guess lastly, Ryan Anderson, because, aside from the fact that he's a fellow Minnesota United fan, he just ran away with that league the entire time. And the fact that he put out those stat sheets every week, very helpful, very good tool. But to everyone in the community, definitely join the Patreon, join the Discord, hang out with these guys more. You guys are awesome, so I appreciate it.
Glad to have you as a member. Mike.
Definitely. So I have a few. I'm going to shout out some friends of mine, Jacqueline and David Warren, published a book that came out today. It's a children's book that illustrates Catholic thinkers who contributed heavily to science. So it really promotes the idea of religion and science as being together as opposed to opposite forces. I'll probably tweet out the link to order that book. Jacqueline is a beautiful, incredibly talented artist, and her illustrations are fantastic. So if you're having a child wanting to promote religion and faith, this is something I think you should look forward to. As far as other plugs, I'm going to first plug out my wife, who has allowed me to do this podcast for years. This is so much for what she sacrificed that she's made in order to get the kids ready, get the homework and all of that done. I'm kind of tearing up a little bit because I had told Reed and Blaine before this is my last podcast as a permanent co-host for MLSFI. Because the time commitment is just too unfair to her, and I don't want to do y'all a disservice by not being able to devote the time properly. But as a result, I want to shout out this fantastic community. The sacrifices that I've made time-wise from doing other things and all of that has always been worth it and justified when it's been done for this community. The people I've met over the years have been absolutely fantastic. All the people I've interacted with on Twitter, too many to name. All the people on Discord, all the people who have come on, guest hosts or other podcast hosts, have been tremendous, and I think we've started many lifelong relationships that I will always treasure. But obviously, I want to specifically mention my other co-hosts, Jason, who isn't co-hosting anymore, but who I'm still friends with, and obviously Reed and Blaine. It's just been a fantastic time. I'm so glad I was able to do this with you, and I wish the game and the community all the best of luck in the future.
I knew that was coming, but I still wasn't quite ready for it. Thank you so much, Mike. It's been a pleasure having you on, and I definitely hope that we can keep doing some stuff on the side. Maybe get some Star Wars podcasts here every now and then, and get Mike back every now and then when during a blue derby or some sort of kind to get some bragging in there.
Mike, I'm trying not to cry over this because you've been here since I started, and it's going to be different without you. Thanks for everything you did to help me along the way, and we're going to miss you on here.
Well, on that bittersweet note, everyone, 2020 has just been a roller coaster. But again, so happy to have you all with us. We'll be back next year in 2021. Enjoy the time off. Enjoy MLS Cup. And just stay safe as we round out the rest of this year. For the last time in 2020, I'll end with saying good luck.